So my name is Sue Keogh, and I run a digital marketing agency in Cambridge called Sue Keogh, which Michelle Harrison knows about because she used to work with us and is now at Helex. So my background is, before I was running the digital marketing agency, was working with people like the BBC and Yahoo and AOL back kind of in the earlier days of web content. And for now, I also did a lot of training with gov.uk, the point where they migrated over 330 different bodies and government departments and organisations to the gov.uk platform, from where I did a lot of training, teaching people how to write for the web, and training people how to use the gov.uk platform when they were introducing this whole new way of presenting content so people could actually understand it, as opposed to, if you remember, the old kind of government websites and council websites that used to make you go a bit head in hands when you had to use them. And in fact, if I ever look at any American kind of government websites as well, they're still back there where we used to be. Anyway, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from those similar sort of principles about how to get across information which can be on paper quite complex, but all sorts of kind of tips and tricks which will help you write it in a way which is, yeah, the title of the whole thing is about more clarity from complexity. And the thing is, when you're writing about science, when you're writing about technology, there can be this feeling that it's got to be written in this very, very dense kind of way, but it doesn't always have to be. So let me just share my screen. Do that a second. Oh, there we go. That's me in a very similar top to what I've got on today. It is different, but it looks identical. Anyway, let's gloss over that. So what I'm going to chat about first is what the actual problem is as I see it. Some ideas on layout, because there's this, it's amazing. You can just make changes with layout and it has this massive impact before you've even changed a word, which is quite incredible. Front loading, which is what we mean there, is to put the best bits first. So it's a way of thinking that works really well with web content, which you can also apply to all sorts of other formats as well. So social media, print, anything else. And plain English, which I said is keep it simple, sausage. Because everyone says keep it simple, stupid. I always think that's a bit mean, it's a bit harsh, isn't it? So if anybody wants to tell me in chat, so I think everyone here kind of works in comms around science. Any particular challenges that you come up against when you're in this kind of area? Yeah, thank you, Tony. I've just seen your message about comments. Yeah, is there anything that anyone finds particularly challenging when you're writing about science sort of subjects? And just stick any thoughts in chat. Multiple audiences and messages, yeah. So you've got some people who are reading it, who are real subject matter experts, but then you might have other people like investors or general public who aren't really so familiar with the terminology. Deciding what content to leave out, yeah, similar sort of thing. Getting the level right, yeah, these kind of things can be really difficult because, and particularly when you're very immersed in it yourselves, it can be difficult to work out, well, if the general public is reading this, what's their level of kind of scientific literacy, if you like. Summarizing complex subject, easy to understand message, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's all these kind of things. Lack of imagery, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I wonder if you find that when you're using stock image libraries, you keep on coming up with the same images, because I know myself when I've looked for stuff like this, so I can't remember which image library it was, but it was always the same shot of test tubes just the whole time. And I was thinking, I just want something different. Keen to hear more on the keep it simple point. Yeah. Yeah, a big worry is about dumbing it down. You don't want to feel like you're dumbing it down. You want to make it more easy to understand, but you're not a children's TV presenter, Okay, this is good because I've got lots of tips on this kind of thing. So particularly when I do training, I do a lot of workshops with within the university itself. So all of these comms people there, and the kind of things that they say to me, because it's a similar thing. They're dealing with a lot of academics around them. So yeah, they worry about dumbing it down. So they want to get this message across in a way which is more easy to understand, but they also don't want the people around them to say, well, you've dumbed it down, you've made it look stupid. They worry about getting it wrong. So if you work in comms in sciences, but maybe that isn't your background, then there can be that worry that, oh, hang on, I've made an awful mistake here, even though you probably haven't, but there's that sort of, worry at the back of your mind. There can be pressure from colleagues. So, here's what I've written, you need to put it on a website, don't go changing it, kind of thing. And then, this feeling that you might not be a subject matter expert. So hopefully what I can run through today will give you lots of ways around these little niggles that you've got at the back of your mind. So yeah, this is what comms people say to me, either if they're working in maybe legal, academia, sciences, and then science tells me, and this is back from when I was doing the gov.uk stuff. So the interesting thing is that the more educated the person, the more specialist their knowledge, but the greater their preference is for plain English. So even though there's this feeling, I mean, I've just mentioned the legal world, maybe if you're dealing with people who are barristers or solicitors or whatever, there's this feeling that you have to write in legalese, these terribly long sentences, these long words. But actually the people on the receiving end, they're dealing with this all day. So if you can write in this way that's got more plain English, shorter sentences, more everyday language, actually to them it's like a breath of fresh air. And so they'll come back again and again to your content because it speaks to them so much more easily, so much more intuitively. So I think there is this feeling that because you're in science or academia or any of these serious professions, that you have to write in this way, and you really don't. But there's this kind of feeling because everyone else around you is doing it, that's the way it's done. And the problem is, this is where you end up with things like this, which I took a screen grab of last week or the week before. So when Boohoo bought Debenhams a week or so back, this was the statement they put out. And I was just reading this and laughing out loud, thinking, what are they actually trying to say? I think they're saying they've bought the website, but they haven't bought the bricks and mortar. But they've made it as difficult to understand as possible. And you don't need to use most of these words to say very simple things. And I've got lots of tips near the end about how you can strip back some of this wordy language into language which is more simple and easy to understand. But this is where we end up a lot of the time, thinking that because it's a very heavy subject, or not heavy so much, but specialist, then we have to write in this kind of way because everybody else around us is doing that. So the first, I'm going to run through three things. So layout and tips on layout and how that can make a big impact. Front loading, which I'll explain in a second, but that's where you put the best bits first, really. And then plain English and some tips on actually using plain English in practice. So layout. The good thing about layout changes is that it helps people read your content. And if they can read it, it helps them retain it as well. And then if they can retain it, they're more likely to share it as well. And then they'll want to come back because they'll feel that what you're presenting them with is something they can understand. And there's no barriers, there's no kind of obstacles to reading it and understanding it. And I like to think that, without changing a single word, you can just massively increase readability. So the thing to remember is that people are scanning the content. So if you think about your own behavior when you're looking on the internet, then you don't read everything line by line. And we like to think that we do, but we don't. So this is using eye tracking software. So it's studied people while they're looking at the Bill Gates Wikipedia page. And so where you've got the blue blobs, this is where people's eyes rest the most. So as you can see, no one's reading the first line straight away saying William Henry Bill Gates the third. Is that the fourth? That's the fourth. No one's reading that bit. Their eyes are going down to the bottom to see who he's married to and his net worth. And this is how we behave the whole time when we're on the internet. We're scanning. We don't want to be confronted with big, dense blocks of text. So we're not reading a Dickens novel. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about today, although I'm talking mostly about writing for the web, it applies elsewhere in other comms as well. So that's the first thing to remember. This is why layout is really important, because we're dealing with people that are very impatient. We're scanning everything. We're hopping around. We're not reading in this kind of very diligent line by line way. And the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is that we're only really taking in 30% of what we're looking at. So the bottom axis, the horizontal one, number of words on a page. So by the time you get to kind of 200, 300, 400 words on a page, if you see the vertical axis, that's about 30, 40%. So we're only really taking in about 30% of the words that we see on a page of web content. And although that might at first seem a bit surprising, when you think about your own behavior and how quickly you land on a page and then you leave, you go somewhere else, how quickly we make these decisions about whether the content is relevant to us, whether it's worth even scrolling down. You know, we really do make snap decisions, and our eyes are darting about all over the place. So we're not reading every single word on the screen. So the tip here in terms of layout is to really give your text room to breathe. So break it up, use more subheadings. Bullet points are brilliant. So bullet points not only help give it space to breathe, but they also trim a lot of the wording. So with just one little lead-in line, then you can have 3 or 4 bullet points below. You're not having to do multiple sentences leading to each key point here. You've just got the one. And then line breaks as well. So anything that spaces things out and gives more white text around it. And in fact, as you can see on my slides that I've got today, in fact, if I went back into academia, I don't think I could write in that way anymore, because I'm so used to writing in this writing for the web kind of way, where I put loads of space around things. I had loads of breaks all the time. Images are really helpful to break things up. Short sentences. I think with government digital services, I think it's 20 words, it could be 25. They try and say don't go over but 20 or 25 words in your sentences. So if you've got a really long sentence that's got lots of brackets and clauses, and it's going to be 50, 75 words, then there's no way you can even put a line break in that, because it's so solid and so dense. And avoid block capitals as well, which I know I'm slightly contradicting myself with my headings here, but we only use these very sparingly. So the reason to avoid block capitals, and this is really interesting as well, there's a Dutch guy, his name was Boomer, and he did this research into linguistics and realized that we recognize words by their shape alone. So particularly when we're first learning to read, we learn our first 10,000 words or whatever just purely by their shape. So if you look at the word alone, you're not spelling out in your head A-L-O-N-E. You're seeing the curve of the A, the upstroke of the L, the round O, and we just recognize these words just by their shape. Whereas if you write things just in block capitals, then it's harder, because all of them, they're the same height and similar sort of width. Then it's harder to read. And I think it can be harder for people with dyslexia as well. So the more kind of white space you put around things, the easier it is for our eyes to recognize the shapes of the words. Really interesting. So let me show you this in practice. So this is a page about pneumonia, lots of jolly stuff. And as you can see here, lots and lots of long words, which of course you will have, because tachycardia, for example, you know, what are you going to replace that with? But there's lots of very long words here, and it also spans the width of the screen, which kind of makes you do that, a bit like watching a tennis. And it's quite densely written. Whereas if you compare this to the NHS website, which is a really good place to get pointers on how to write for the web, actually, they do it really well. You can see here you've got this really clear hierarchy in titles. They've got the first line in bold, so you know, yeah, that's a summary. On the links, they've got slightly less to do with layout, but handy anyway. You've got like breathlessness. You know, if you click on that, it's going to go to a page on breathlessness. There's none of this click here or read more type stuff. Clear bullet points. So you've just got that one lead in line. The main symptoms of a chest infection can include this, and this. So they're not saying some symptoms can include this, but other people might find that they get a high temperature. And in some cases, there's a rapid heartbeat. And for some other people, you know, so you're stripping all of that stuff out, which is quite redundant. And again, they've got lots of white space around it. And the interesting thing with this as well is that it shows they're thinking about the user at the other end. So if someone's looking at this page on the NHS website, chances are they're feeling a bit poorly. So, you know, it's important to remember as well that not everybody reading your content is in perfect health, you know, in a lovely big office with fast Wi-Fi and 2 monitors and all of that. You know, a lot of the time people are looking at your content on their phone, and they're in a rush, and they're on a bus, or they're holding a baby, or all sorts. You know, people are distracted. So the easier you can make it to read, the easier it is for it to go in to into your audience. So quick summary on the whole layout thing. So putting a summary in bold, really helpful. Loads of white space, lots of subheadings. And I like to make the subheadings tell a bit of a story, if you like. So if you, I'd like to feel if you take away the text in between, they'd still have this consistent tone. So maybe if one is a question, the next one is a question, then try and make more questions. Or if one is an action that tells people something they have to do, then make them all like that. So there's this kind of consistent feel. Bullet points, love bullet points. I really do. Reducing text width is really handy again, so you're not getting that kind of left-right feeling. Short sentences, that can really help, and that enables you to add in more line breaks as well, because you've got more break points. Avoiding big chunks of text, and line breaks, if you are writing for the web, adding in more than you think you need is really helpful. So try adding one after each sentence and see how it looks. That might be overdoing it depending on the content, but yeah, you can't beat adding in more white space around things. And then, like I say, this doesn't really strip out some words. But I thought I was going to do this live, then I thought, no, I'll actually just prepare it in advance. I was actually looking around for an example of how this is done well, and Imperial College, their content is actually quite good, and I was looking for a best practice example from there. And then I saw this paragraph here on the left, and I thought, actually, no, I'm just going to edit this instead to show what I mean. So this is just taken from one of their recent news articles. And then me, because I'm just continually editing the whole time when I'm dealing with content, I thought, let's just see how this looks. Okay. And so within about 5 minutes, I'd taken it from 203 words to 96, and I hadn't changed the meaning in any way. So they were doing a lot of, I mean, there's no time to read it through in detail now, but there's a lot of backwards and forwards in time with this. We began by doing this, then we introduced that, and then that began with an online session, then followed by 8 a.m. Then the next morning this happened, then at the start of the week. And as you're reading it, it's a bit of a seesaw effect where you're not quite sure where you're up to. So even just for my own benefit, I put it into bullet points so I could sort of map out, okay, what was the actual flow of activity here. And then so by the time you've taken out all of those little connecting phrases to say this happened next, then that, actually you've taken out about half of it. And then I added more line breaks, and then, like I say, the bullet points, and then straight away it's much easier to understand at a glance, which is what you want, because, like I say, we've got this audience that's very flighty and is skipping about from line to line. So, okay, so there's some thoughts on layout and the sort of wizardry you can deploy there. And so the second thing I was going to talk about was front loading. So the way that people read on the web, and then this does apply to other areas as well, but it's in this F pattern. And I don't know, some of you might have come across this before as well. So this is another eye tracking study done on the right hand. You've got a Google page of Google search results, then there's another website, and where it's red, that shows where our eyes dwell the most. They're like the hot spots really, and then where it's blue, it's a bit colder, we're not really looking there quite so much, and so we do naturally kind of gravitate towards top left, in the same way that when you're if you're reading a book, then we start top left and we read left to right. And so to show you this in practice, the Anglia-Ruskin website, which is a bit like the NHS, is actually really good as an example of how to lay out web content. Really nice, clear hierarchy of headings and subheadings and lovely bullet points, lots of white space. But you can see here you've got logo top left, then across the navigation as your eyes go left to right. They've got the key areas there. And then join us in September, their big key message they want you to read. And then you move to the right again, you've got an image. And then they know that the thing that people are trying to do the most, they just want to look up a course to see, okay, can you study medicine at Anglia-Ruskin? And so they've got that there. So it's following that kind of very natural F pattern, which is really nice to see. And the other thing as well to remember is that we spend the majority of our time when we're looking at web content above the fold. And by that, I mean, if you picture the days that we used to go to newsagent when everything wasn't under lockdown, but a pile of newspapers. So above the fold, that's what you see. I think today it's going to be Meghan and Harry announcing their second baby. So that'll be the picture on all of the papers. And to get to the rest of it, you need to pick that newspaper up and you need to open it out, and then you need to flick through the pages. So that above the fold phrase is still common in web content, and this is where we spend the bulk of our time. I'm not into PowerPoints with loads of graphs on, but anyway, but I've got 2 in this, so but they're essential. And so we do spend the majority of our time above the fold. And then actually, if you just look towards the right, 2,000 pixels down, we whiz all the way through, and then we skip to the end as well. I think people like to see the conclusion, so they mostly dwell right at the top. And then quite often we just scroll all the way down and look either in the footer or, ignore the stuff in the middle. Just tell me how I download this, or how I book a ticket, or how I do whatever action I need to take. So this is why this phrase front loading, putting the important bits first, is really important when it comes to web copy. So, I was mentioning Dickens earlier. It's not a case that people want to be led slowly through each segment and they get to the end and then there's a plot twist and then they find out, what happens. When it comes to web copy, then we want the important bits first, because this is where we're making a decision about whether we want to read on. So it helps people know where they are. Am I on the right page? Decide if the content is relevant and whether to stay or move on, because you're giving them, I'll show you some examples in a second, but you're giving them a reason. You're telling them why they're there, and then you're giving them a reason to stay as well. So as an example, the Science Museum, there's some other people that are really great with content. Also the Natural History Museum, their email marketing is really good. So discover the incredible story of the sun in our new blockbuster exhibition. So it's a story about the sun, not the newspaper, and it's an exhibition. And it says it's blockbuster, but then that doesn't really tell you what's in it. So what they've done, and I love this, they've got Jimmy Carter's solar panels from the White House. So they're not just saying, okay, this is a blockbuster exhibition, it's really interesting. They're giving you a real solid reason why. So there's an ancient Babylonian tablet, there's prototype fusion reactor. They're really saying there's a real breadth of stuff here that's going to be interesting, and we want you to come and look at it. And this is so helpful when you're writing about sciences, because it enables you to just pull out some of the kind of more interesting, tasty nuggets from the piece down below, put them right in the beginning, right in the introduction. And you might even want to write it in the introduction in a way that is more simplified, knowing that because people are going to be interested, then you've got their attention now, and they will read all the way through to get the more in-depth explanation. And I do front loading everywhere. So titles, this is TechCrunch. As you can see here, if you just scan through this page, then, okay, coronavirus conspiracies, right, Apple and Google, Tesla, Pangea, okay, something about Zoom, right, got that, So as you're scanning all the way through, your eyes start on the left-hand side all the time, and you're given the information that you need. It's not written in this abstract way, that says, let's look at that Apple and Google one, that says exciting tool for iOS and Android coming soon. Okay, that's an Apple and Google story. And particularly say if you're looking on your mobile, if you're writing titles in this way and that comes up in an email subject line, then that it's definitely going to fit. It's not going to be so long that the important bit is on the far hand side and gets cut off. I like to front load my links as well. And again, I'm just editing all the time when I'm writing. So you might start by writing, to get our early bird rate, please book your ticket, but then just flip it around so that comes first. So book your ticket and get the early bird rate. Download the report to see the results. And it's all these little things that make your content, even if you're writing about quite kind of intricate, heavy subjects, they make it more easy to read and use and navigate your way around just by flipping things like this around all the time. So try and use keywords. So if you're talking about Apple and Google and Tesla, then try and use these words in your titles, in the intros, in the excerpt. So say if you're writing a blog post, make sure the excerpt, which might show on the blog index page, has got some keywords in it as well. Put your links and calls to action at the start of a sentence instead of right at the end where they get cut off, or might do the annoying thing where there's a line break halfway through. Using images to reinforce the message. So we do process images really, really fast, more quickly than the text. So using a strong image to reinforce the wording is really effective. Starting with the conclusion. So like I say, you're not writing a whodunit. This is web content. So you need to write I'd like to write the conclusion last, but then put that first. Get specific, not abstract. So again, using those keywords, using specifics. Instead of saying this is a brilliant exhibition, you want to say that you've got Jimmy Carter's solar panels in it. Don't leave people guessing. Try and get that kind of stuff right at the beginning, because that's what makes them interested. Specifying the audience. This is really good in when you start a page of content, to say to mention the sort of people that might, say if it's an event, to say that it's for early stage career researchers or something like that. And so people get a feel that they're in the right place. And this is an interesting one as well. So terminology and spelling out acronyms. Just a thing that I learned back in my Gov.uk days, that if you do have an acronym, then try and spell it out right at the beginning and then just use the acronym after that. And just because you've spelled it out in one page doesn't mean that someone's going to go to, they'll go to another one, they'll know that. So you do need to do that each time. And so this kind of front-loading mindset. So you're always thinking, what questions do your readers have? And then how can you solve them as quickly as possible? A good example of this is the page on VAT, for example. Nothing to do with life sciences, but it's just a good example of this, where in the past on the HMRC site, it used to have all of this waffle about what VAT is and the history of VAT and why we use VAT and all that kind of thing. But if you go on the page now, it just says the current rate of VAT is 20%, and it's in massive letters because they've realised that the majority of people that go to that page, that's a question that they've got and that's what they need to answer. So again, this is all part of, you don't have to dumb things down, you don't have to write them differently, but it's just thinking about what you present people with first, and then that helps get the message across more clearly. And then, how can you take the tastiest nuggets and put them first? So an email newsletter, for example, don't go calling it Life Science Quarterly May 2021, because that's just so boring. If you've got explosions in there, if you've got a cure for COVID, all this kind of stuff, you want to get that in the subject line, because if you don't, then no one reads it, because it's so boring. So anything that you've got later on that you can pull out and put right at the beginning, whether it's on a web page, whether it's on I don't know, document to investors explaining why they should support this clinical trial. If there's anything around the outcomes that are going to be really exciting and have a massive impact, then you need to get that right there in the introduction, because that's what's going to get them interested. I really like this as an example. This is on a social media post. So, and what they've done here is exactly this. So they've pulled out some numbers, and if you've got big numbers, big stats, that can be really exciting in the introduction or in your subject line and anywhere at the beginning. 1,200 hanging garlands, more than 1 million dried blooms. So all of these things that they've pulled out, instead of just saying, come to our new exhibition, it just makes it much more interesting and more compelling. So this front loading idea, you can deploy it everywhere. And then last of all, sorry, let me just have a little sip of water. Plain English, which is something that people talk about doing a lot, and then they just don't do it. So I've got some tips on doing it. And the idea is that you're going to make your content more readable and more accessible. And the Plain English campaign website itself, it's not the best looking website, but it's got lots of useful things there, lots of tips, lots of kind of like quizzes and things, so that you can give it a go. And the idea is that it's not just faster for you to write, but it's faster for people to read. And I've got examples of people like, I think BT saved millions by taking a form that was 11 pages long, rewriting it in plain English and making it about two pages. And then the number of people that then actually completed it was just thousands more. And it's about using this everywhere, really, to make your content more easy to understand. So it reduces the cognitive load, which I'll explain a bit more about in a minute. Breaks down barriers. So you're not putting up this obstacle where people are reading your content and thinking, oh, it's a bit difficult for me to understand. You're making it more open and accessible for people, which helps people understand and retain it. And then, more readable, more accessible, and particularly when you've got people of different levels of literacy. I think that's really important. And this ties in with what I was saying about boomer shapes. So we understand words, we recognize words that are quite short and more familiar, sort of everyday words. We recognize them, we don't even think about them, we just say them, we think them. But then anything that's over, say, 8 or 9 letters, then if it's less familiar, we kind of have this slight brain stumble where we see it, we don't quite recognize it, then we have to think it through, which is why quite often, on the rare occasion that I make a typo, it's quite often with the word around the long word, because I'm so busy thinking about the long word and that I'm probably spelling that wrong, or someone with a complicated surname, I'm thinking, oh God, I mustn't get that wrong, that I then I put can't instead of can afterwards, or something silly like that. And this kind of absorbs a lot of brain capacity. So when you're writing about science, then you're going to get a lot of this, you're going to get these longer words, and you can't just replace them with something else that's more everyday language because it's a medical term. So yeah, you can't just strip that out because it will change the meaning completely. So what I strongly suggest doing is taking the language around it, so around these more complex terms, and making them really simple. So the Sanger Institute, for example, you're not going to change pathogen and cellular evolution and phenotypic and all of that, because that will, you need those words there because they are what they are. But what they've done is said things like, in all cases, comma, the studies provide insights. So they're writing in conversational language and short words, simple sentences, but around words which for some people, if they're not very scientific, would struggle with. Well, not so much struggle, but would not be so familiar. And this is a really good approach when you're thinking about writing in plain English, to not worry so much about changing everything, but just by going through and just tweaking that word, reducing that one here and shortening that one there, that has quite a big impact when you put it all together. And there's an essay that George Orwell wrote in 1943, 1949, around then, on writing good English, and he says never use a long word where a short one will do. So he kind of preempted the website era. But it's really helpful when you're writing about science to not worry about changing everything, but just simplifying the bits that you can change. So yeah, short sentences, really helpful. Simple everyday words where you can, and being specific rather than general, it's really useful. And using active verbs. So if you want people to book a ticket to your webinar, then you want to say book a ticket, reserve your place, not visit for reserve. If you're interested in reserving your place, you need to do this. Just tell people what they need to do. In the same way that we're quite impatient and flighty when we're browsing the web, then we don't mind being told what to do in a very sort of straight and direct way. And then using words appropriate to your audience. So you might find that on your homepage you use much simpler language, but then by the time that people have kind of dug down a little bit, and the page about hang on, what was the word in this? Pathogens. There you go. So by the time you got to the page on pathogens, then you know that people who are in this area are more familiar with it. So you can probably use more complex language there. So you don't have to write in exactly the same way in every particular bit of communications. If anyone's got their, maybe I'll ask Tony on this one. Right. Okay, quiz for you. So what could you say, thinking about talking in plain English, what can you say instead of at the present time? This is quiz time.
Currently.
Currently? Oh, even shorter. 3 letters.
Now.
There we go. Utilize.
Use.
Use. Articulate. It's another 3-letter one.
Explain.
Yeah, or say is even better. But it's all in context anyway. Requirement.
Need.
Yeah. Subsequent. This is so mean of me.
After.
Next. And then commence.
Start.
There we go. I feel really mean now. So, okay. And then you've also got things like, meet with. That's a particular bugbear of mine, because meet just does the job, doesn't it? During the course of, what could we say there?
During.
Yeah, you can, exactly. So you can just say during, on a daily basis. Again, just say daily. And I mean, actually, in actual conversation, you probably would say things like on a daily basis, because it softens it a bit. But when you're actually writing in your written communications, then there's no need to. Merge together, again, you can just say merge. over exaggerate, exaggerate is fine. And then 3 a.m. in the morning, again, it's the kind of thing that you might say conversationally, maybe to add emphasis. But there's no need to do it in your page of web content or whatever. So there's all these little ways that you can you can plain Englishify, she says making things up, the bits around the edges whilst leaving the stuff that you know that you can't change because it will, it's a medical term, for example. So in summary of the 3 things that I was talking about, so small changes to layout can really help with clarity. So more bullet points, more line breaks, more subheadings. So anything, anytime that you can get those in, really, really helpful. Front loading the content as well. So saying exactly what you want to say right at the beginning. And that's whether it's in introductions, subject lines, social media posts, all of these things, getting in those keywords and specifics right at the beginning is really helpful. And then plain English. So writing in a way that's a bit more conversational. And even if it means leaving in the more lengthy, complex terms, but simplifying the stuff around it, that will just help massively. So I can show these afterwards, but some good things to read if you want to read up on this. Government Digital Services, their blog is very good. They kind of demystify the process, and they've got their original design principles, which can be applied to all sorts of content. It's really good. Nielsen Norman are the people that have done the original research into how people read on the web, and that's really interesting as well. Completely different. Monzo, the bank, their tone of voice guidance is really good. And so it explains about how you can write in a simple manner. And of course, they're talking about things to do with finance. So it's a similar kind of problem. And they've got a mixed audience. So that can be quite good. It's quite nice to look for inspiration in places that are nothing to do with the kind of writing that you're writing about, that you're writing. And then there's a blog on a Sue Keogh blog. Usability is sexy. What's the other one? Readability is 4. I was particularly inspired after going to this really great conference called Camp Digital once. But we do like to emphasize this as much as possible. And then we've also got, if this is useful for anybody, we just did this a couple of weeks ago and it's proven really popular. So I thought I'd tell you about it as well. It's a copywriting checklist. So you can go through all the different points on your website and give them a quick tidy up, because there's all sorts of things at the moment as a result of COVID that you might be doing differently, even if it's just your contact page and you've forgotten to change the phone number because everyone's working remotely. It's quite a useful checklist for copywriting. And then this is our website and this is me on Twitter. So if anybody wants to connect, I'm always up for talking about this sort of thing. So there we go. Sorry, that was lots of talking. Any questions?
I'm going to kick off with one and then hopefully others will chip in. But you mentioned about the importance of defining your audience. And it kind of resonated with me from, I think it was Sophie's comment about how do you not alienate your scientists by trying to make it more simple. But is that part of defining your audience, kind of directing people away from what you're about to write because it's not for them and there will be other opportunities you'll write for that? How much should you narrow your audience, I guess, is my, if I'm trying to put it in plain English.
I think it's really useful to try to help people filter themselves in and filter themselves out. So to give you an example, not related so much to sciences, but if you imagine university web pages, then they've got undergraduates and then they've got postgraduates. And so they don't want to waste people's time by getting the PhD people, giving them stuff about how to find accommodation when you first move to Cambridge or whatever. So it is quite useful in the introduction to say things that kind of reflect back to people who they are. So when you first come to Cambridge as an undergraduate, you'll find da 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 da, or on the PhD and the postgraduate bit, postgraduates who study at Cambridge find da 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 da. So those kind of, just by gently referencing it in the introductions, it just confirms to people that they're in the right place, which means then they'll stay longer. They haven't got that kind of feeling of, oh, hang on, what am I doing? what am I in the right bit? So yeah, I think in a way, it's not really so much about narrowing it down, but more just to make sure that you're reflecting back at people that they're in the right place, I think.
I think I see in the chat box we have a question from Natalie.
21 messages.
If Natalie'd like to unmute herself and ask the question, then that would be good.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi. I was just going to ask how many columns look best when you're writing blocks of text? You said one big column is a bit much.
Mm.
Do you have a preference?
Is that on a web page?
On a web page or in an email, a mail shot?
It rather depends on the design. But if you have it, so you know, like the NHS example I showed you, that was just like one column of text. However, the whole thing, it was quite a narrow span. So I think there is guidance actually on the percentage width that it should be. So it's something like no more than 75%. So I can look into that and find out. And equally on an email, then yeah, I mean, you probably have one or two really. You could have three, but then the only problem with that is that if it resizes on mobile, then everything kind of flips around a little bit too much. So I would maybe go for one. Here we go, making it up as she goes along. But on a page of web content, maybe go for one, but make sure that it doesn't go over sort of 60, 75%. And if it does, then split it into two. I'm going to make a note of this because I bet there's science and data on this that will help.
I'm sure there'll have been a study somewhere.
Yeah, there's no web developers on this call sat there going, what's she talking about?
I mean, what I found interesting as well, Sue, during your talk was that ability to take words out.
Yes.
I'm bad enough when I'm speaking. I'm worse when I'm writing because I just keep feeling I have to explain things. Are there any tips that you would say, like when you can feel confident, you don't need to say any more, sort of less is more bit?
I think the whole idea about bullet points is really helpful because by the time, if you're listing more than 3 things in a paragraph, then that in itself is sort of screaming out for some bullet points instead. And then that gives you the confidence because by the time you've written one leading line, then you go back and you realize, well, actually, no, I don't need all of this other stuff. And also even just the act of putting in more line breaks separates it out and helps you see visually, oh, hang on, I am actually repeating myself here. But it's interesting what you say about confidence because sometimes it can be a confidence thing and you almost want to fill the space, particularly if it's an area where you're not so, if there's anyone here that's in comms and a science related subject, but that's not their background at all, then there can be that feeling sometimes that, oh, you know, what if I've got this wrong? So you do want to kind of pad it out almost. So yeah, I think actually adding in more line breaks, it makes it more visually kind of apparent to you that, oh, actually I'm kind of padding this out. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Do you have any more questions that anybody wants to shout up?
Hello, Greg.
Hi, Sue. Thanks very much for that. I suppose that my question kind of relates to some extent the ego that we all have, where we go into writing thinking I'm here to really flex my muscles and show what I can do from a comms perspective and that I can write well, versus the very brutalist, I'm going to focus entirely on clarity and speed at which somebody can understand it. I suppose it's just how you see those two things balancing out.
I think it depends where the content is. So if you're writing an FAQs page, for example, then you really want to be making that information as clear and precise and concise as possible. Whereas if it's more of a thought leadership piece and more of a blog post, then yeah, then flex your muscles and start being a bit more flowery with it and get more personality in. I think the joy of this is that you can write in different ways in different places. Equally, email marketing. No one wants to spend, I mean, who welcomes having more emails? And so you really, what you're trying to do there is give people tasty little nuggets of something that makes them click on it and then go through to your more lengthy article. So that again can be a bit more functional, but you've got to give it a lot of spark because otherwise who's going to click through? But then yeah, so that'll be quite functional. An FAQs page would be quite functional. An about page might have a bit more personality to it. So yeah, I think you can experiment in different areas really. So I wouldn't worry about trying to use all of these approaches in exactly the same way. But I do think it's important to try and space things out because then that really, really helps with accessibility and readability as well. So that's really, really helpful.
See, we have a question from Sophie. I know, Sophie, do you want to unmute and sort of ask your question?
Hi, Sue. Thank you. Great presentation. I just wanted to ask about pull quotes and how you feel about those in addition to subtitles or instead of, where do they fit into the mix?
Do you mean when they kind of display as a nice box that is showing on the side, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so kind of,
Mm.
yeah, pulling out a sub part of a sentence on its own, maybe to underline a stat, or somebody has said, you know, Sue says this is really important.
Yeah, no, I
Awesome.
really like that. And it's a bit like using images. It means that it's breaking things up and just making it more visually interesting as you read through the piece. And I also like taking out quotes and using them as a title as well. So because sometimes a quote that someone says can be just have real kind of zing to it. And so you can use that as a social media, the text in a social media post, for example, or the title itself. So that can be quite a good technique to use. But yeah, so pull quotes on the side that highlight particular stat or anything can be really helpful. Anything that saves it from being just this, you know, page that goes on and on and on, that's just text in massive paragraphs like that. Anything to break it up is really nice. In the same way that in print, then that can be really lovely when you get these little quotes on the side. Did I see someone asking about images as well? I'm just looking through there.
There was a question earlier on about how hard it was to find the right imagery, and I think Emma and Natalie had suggested some sources of imagery.
Yes. A couple of tips there as well. So we use we've just got a subscription to iStock, which I think it's £20 a month. Was it 25? With VAT on one of those. And the nice thing about this is that it saves us a ton of time. So although you are you're paying the money for it. I mean, actually, so Michelle, who's here, when you used to work with us, I think back then we were still hunting around free image sites all the time, which is fine because they're free. But then there's that time factor in terms of, you know, your staff's or, you know, or my time looking them up, and they're not always that good quality. They can be. And you also run a slight risk, and I've had this as well, where lawyers ring you up 2 or 3 years later and say that you've used an image that's not copyright free, even though I sworn blind that it was on a rights free, license free website, but someone who's uploaded it has just said that it's free to use, and then it's not. So what we do now, we've got this subscription to iStock, which is really good, 20 quid a month, whatever. And then every time we download an image, we put the reference number in the title as well, so that we know, yeah, we've definitely paid for this. It's all above board. However, someone mentioned Unsplash, and actually Unsplash is very good. There's some, very sort of sophisticated images that they have there. But something like iStock, don't want to kind of bang on about it, but they've recently just introduced a load of images with people wearing masks, for example, or more things to do with labs, because they know that people are searching for COVID related or lockdown related images. So there's stuff there that's getting updated all the time. So that is actually quite useful. And the same with Getty, there's options there for Getty as well. But yeah, that can really make things stand out, as well as the layout and all that kind of thing. Any other questions? I'm just thinking about multiple audiences and messages. Yeah, because people were asking at the beginning about what content to leave out to get the level right and different audiences. I think, like I was saying, think about where people are interacting with you. So if it's a page of content which is aimed at investors, then you might want to be writing in a certain way. If it's a page on your website or another bit of information which is aimed at researchers, then you're naturally going to gravitate to slightly different language. And I think the key thing is to think about this when you're designing the content in the first place. And so really think about your audiences when you're structuring the content in the early days, and think, like another one, for example, to go back to education as an example, quite often you get people who are teachers or lecturers, but then again, they're parents as well. So you sometimes get this overlap there. But if you think about who are the people who are predominantly reading this content or visiting this page, then that can kind of help guide you in the way that you structure it. If that's helpful.
Just leading on from that, Sue.
Yeah.
There are some things that you'd want to go to multiple audiences. So I'm thinking here, you may have pharma companies you want to partner your technology with, but almost could be investors as well. And they may look for slightly different emphasis on things. And equally, if it's a conference, it could be a conference that's for 5 or sorts of different sorts of roles, if you like. If I look at the One Nucleus portfolio of a non-Helix conference, it's partly for scientists, it's partly for investors, it's partly for business development and marketing. Is there a danger if you try and cater to all of those in one message that you miss the mark with all of them? And are you better putting out your information, I guess, tailored to each of those subsets within your audience?
Yeah, I think it depends on the volume, doesn't it? I suppose. I mean, if where you're leading to people to is very clearly segmented, then yes. But if it's not, so if you're communicating with all of these different people, and then at the end of it, you're still just leading them to the same website to buy a ticket and the same page and that kind of thing, then in a way you don't need to so much. And like I was saying at the beginning about people who are more specialist in a certain area, they still prefer plain English anyway. Then there is a slight danger that we overthink it too much, and we're so worried about saying the right thing to the right audience that actually we end up kind of tying ourselves up in knots and not really saying it clearly at all. So I suppose it depends on partly on the medium, but then also how segmented they really are and how much overlap we've got. But I wouldn't worry about trying to overcomplicate things just because people are I wouldn't make the language more complex deliberately, if you know what I mean, just because I know that I'm talking to someone that's very scientific, because I know that actually at the end of the day they want it explained in simple language as much as everybody else. Writer's block. Oh, that's a good one. Get away from your computer. You've got to move away from it. You can't make any progress if you're looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, and particularly if you're trying to maybe overwrite something you've got already. If you're trying to write some fresh web copy, for example, or you've got a paragraph, maybe it's fiction or a press release, whatever, and you're going round and round in circles, you'll not make any progress if you just sit there keep on doing the same thing. Go and make a cup of tea. I've come up with some brilliant taglines and titles for all sorts of things. When I've gone to the kettle, or I go for a walk, or I was saying to someone the other day, actually, a thing that I used to do back in my when I was more of a freelance copywriter is read something that I'm not interested in at all. So my husband went through a phase of playing golf, which thankfully he's stopped now. But I'm really not interested in golf. I couldn't care less about golf. I don't understand it. I don't like the trousers. I just can't. I'm just not interested. So I'd read a golfing magazine, and then that would kind of cause other sparks to fly. Look at something that's completely unrelated. Or I used to, when I was working on my own at home, I used to listen to the 5 Live phone in every morning because it's really chatty and noisy. So number 1, get away from the computer, and number 2, stimulate your brain with something that you're not interested in and has got nothing to do with what you're writing about. And then sometimes that can kind of make other things bubble up. And very last, actually, one other tip on that: subject lines, like for a blog post or a like email marketing subject lines. Just write a load down. Don't write one and then go, oh, that's not right, and then move to the next one. Just keep on going, and you might come up with 30. And you realise the next day when you go back to it, you think, oh yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll take the second part of the 5th one I came up with, and I'll put it at the beginning of the 10th one, and I'll put a colon in the middle, and then that will work. So I know we can delete as we go, but you don't have to. Imagine you're doing it in pen and paper and you just maybe put a line through, but you're not deleting it entirely. Yeah, I said I had tips on this. I've clearly had a lot of writer's block over the years, I think.
We've got Heather Luff. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I've got, good walk spoiled. That's right, Greg. Yeah, I know, particularly right now. We need to take over these golf courses. Anyway, sorry, where would you suggest is best to
amplify your content?
Well, it depends, I suppose. It depends what you're trying to do. I mean, I was just having a discussion on LinkedIn with someone this morning about the proliferation of social media features and platforms that are just sort of popping up. I think a lot of people have had too much time in their hands over the last year and are suddenly adding all these features everywhere. But I think you still can't go wrong with LinkedIn. You know, you still can't go wrong with Twitter. Maybe it depends. I mean, if you're trying to reach the general public with a health story and you want to, and it's got something to do with family or children or learning, then actually Facebook can still be good for that. If you're trying to reach investors and scientists and people who aren't very kind of open on social media, then LinkedIn is still going to be really good for that. Still can't beat a bit of traditional PR and getting stories in the local press and that kind of thing. So yeah, kind of it depends on what the content is that you're trying to get out there.
Thanks. So I'm conscious of time.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to ask you, you say you're sort of continually editing as you go along because you'll see that you would have written it differently or you might have changed a few things. What was the last sort of story headline you looked at and thought, oh, I wish I'd thought of that?
Of a better, well, actually, we've got a few blog posts at the moment. What, wished that I'd done it better. One I just went around in circles with.
One you've looked at and you just wished you'd thought of that title first because it would have fitted something you wanted to write about.
Oh God, I've got so many examples on this one. Because I used to work in radio, so we're always coming up with good names for series as well. Actually, I'm going to answer different. So I'm going to give you a different answer because it's funnier. But back when I was working for Yahoo and we were having to write in a featured box, come up with titles that people would click on based on stories that we hadn't written. There was a thing about U2 and how their stylist, she was taken to court because she'd been stealing their clothes. So she stole, The Edge always wears a hat, stole his hat and various things from U2's wardrobe. And the title I came up with that was Bono Wears Your Trousers. I'm still really happy about that. Anyway, one for the older ones. Remember that song. So yeah, sorry. It's not the answer that you wanted, but it makes me laugh.
That's fine. We've got probably time for one last one. I think, Michelle, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was going to say, great presentation, Sue. As Sue mentioned, we used to work together a while back.
Yeah, you don't have to say this stuff anymore.
No, so I've heard a few of those tips already. And yeah, definitely like the bullet points and the front loading have stood me in good stead. But yeah, I was going to ask around, so if there's a few of you that are going to be copywriting or, you want the wider team to adopt good copywriting practices, what kind of top tips do you have for rolling out those sort of practices across the company? Is it handy to have a tone of voice guide or do individual writing workshops with teams? What do you kind of suggest?
Yeah, I think getting a tone of voice guide in is really important because there's all sorts of terms that people get a bit hung up on, and as each new person joins the company, they might write it in a different way. So if you've got this central document, then it means that people can go back and refer to it all the time, and particularly if it's around something sensitive like I don't know, palliative care or something like that, where it's quite sensitive subject matter. And so what I would do though, because there's so many out there, there's no point sitting down and trying to write this all from scratch, particularly if your background isn't in writing tone of voice guidelines. I would take something that's out there and adapt it. So something like, in fact, thinking about healthcare, Macmillan, their tone of voice, and it's also their branding guidelines. So you get all the colour palette stuff as well. But things like that is really helpful. That helps you write about sensitive subjects, but in the right way. Monzo, I mentioned. Duolingo, I came across the other day, is really good. Guardian Style Guide. Cambridge University has got its own style guide as well. So yeah, I would definitely get one in place, but like I say, you don't have to start from scratch. You can take someone else's and kind of build upon that. I mean, obviously give them credit and don't pass it off as your own. But yeah, other people will have done the legwork for you, so that can be quite helpful.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. I think that takes us to time. So, Sue?
Yeah, sorry I raced through everybody, but
I think you shared a lot of information and plenty of food
quite a lot
came from the questions as well. So thanks to everybody for participating. So from me as Chief Exec of One Nucleus, it's been a pleasure to be with you, see the insights shared, and we look forward to welcome you to the next one in March, which I think is talking about employees being your brand. ambassadors. So look forward to everyone coming back. Stay safe and see you all soon. Thank you.